welcome to the Language of Life podcast. My name is Paul Taylor, and I want to share with you about the Language of Life. The Language of Life is a podcast, and it is a platform focused on intriguing stories about common life topics such as relationships, finance, and careers, all for the purpose of inspiring and motivating you for success. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me today Mr. Donald E. Scoggins and his brother, Mr. Hugh M. Scoggins III, with me today to just share with us some information that I believe is going to be transformational, and it's going to bring about an understanding that we all need to have to be able to have a strong foundation upon which we stand and knowing how to project us to the future in business and in our success. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome these two awesome men with us today. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about themselves. Donald, I'd like to start with you first, sir, and then, of course, Hugh, with you following up after your brother, Donald. Donald, the floor is yours.
Well, it's hard to introduce myself, but because I don't know that much. Well, I do know a little bit about me, but I would say that born in Philadelphia, raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, been on the DMV area since 1972. I'm a Vietnam veteran, been involved in housing, real estate, in the military, and been involved in quite a few civic organizations. And through all those activities, I've sort of developed a brand. My own personal brand is to, while helping people, I'm very much focused on the economic health of individuals, because I believe that when your economics is right, a lot of other things about your life will be right, So I like to encourage financial literacy and helping those who want to be able to be comfortable in their later years. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I like to do. But I've been involved in affordable housing activities also.
Awesome. You?
Just to piggyback on what Donald said, we were, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama during the war, and my parents moved from Birmingham, up towards Philadelphia. We spent, as Donald said, our early childhood years in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Went to St. Emma Military Academy in Powhatan, Virginia. I eventually, myself, I went to A&T College, and I went to Hampton. I finished Hampton, got my MBA up in Boston. Currently, right now, I'm living in Maryland, Ellicott City, Maryland. I just recently worked for the city of Baltimore as a ADA compliance officer. I'm now still looking to actively look for a job. And I like to be able to say at this point in my life, I want to try to be a role model, to not only my contemporaries, but also to those who will come after my brother and I. So, I value this opportunity to try to do whatever I can to shed whatever part of my life that can be positive to others.
Well, that is awesome. But, as we go into these questions, ladies and gentlemen, on the Language of Life podcast, we're going to find out some very, very important information, because both of you gentlemen, your family was very important and involved intricately and participants of the Black business community, which today is historically known as the Black Wall Street. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two men here that are products of the Black Wall Street. And so I want to talk about that and how that has affected you and your parents, and being descendants of parents and families that are part of Black Wall Street, that made up Black Wall Street. How has that Don? How has that Hugh? How has that affected you as men and pursuing your goals through college, through education? Donald, I heard that you served our country. Hugh, and in so many ways, you've served in Baltimore and effectively made some major accomplishments. How has Wall Street, how has that affected you in a positive way to be successful even as men today? Donald, I'll start with you with that question.
You want to go with that first, or what?
Since you've
transformed Baltimore in such a nice way, giving me inspiration. Why don't you?
Well, I guess the one thing that I would say is that most of my working career has been in the area of disadvantaged business enterprise, working with minority vendors, working with women-owned businesses, and that's pretty much what I'd like to do and to continue to do. And as you alluded to, Black Wall Street, our father had his business right there on Greenwood Avenue, and he used to give Donald and I a lot of different stories that I never realized at this point in my life had some significance of being on Greenwood Avenue. I don't know how many other Black businesses were there. Maybe Donald, you may know, but our father had a Scoggins Electric was on the corner of Greenwood and I don't know the other street.
Greenwood and Archer.
Okay, Greenwood and Archer. And Daddy, our father, and my Uncle Wendell, he was one of the first Black TV technicians when he finished the RCA school for TV technicians in Tulsa. And I guess we've always sort of been brought up to be entrepreneurial spirited, particularly Donald. Donald has had pretty much of a good, having his own real estate business. Myself, to this day, I like to work with small and minority businesses, giving them advice on, capitalization or not being undercapitalized, talking about insurance, having the right kind of bonding. But more important is to talk about what it is that's unique that they can bring to a business that's going to make them successful. I would like to take just a little short time, if Donald can remember, our father used to interview kids for the summer for one of the churches. And Daddy would bring them in the office and interview them. And Donald and I would be in the tool crib. I don't know if you remember his little tool room down behind the office. And he would ask us afterwards to critique how the interview went. And I think some of the things that we learned in terms of how you're supposed to conduct yourself during an interview or whatever has sort of stayed with us today, and give us a certain degree of success today, I would imagine.
I would say in reference to my father with his electrical business, he was an entrepreneur, and he was the type of person that if something came up, that was sort of challenging, he had a way of getting around it, and I thought that was pretty interesting. He would do certain things that, well, I don't know if I should say it here on the podcast and everything. Since he's not around, I'll go ahead and say it. But I would say that I remember several, being an entrepreneur, money is always tight. You have to know how to juggle various things, and I remember when the electricity would get cut off, Daddy would know how to get it cut, but he would know how to cut it back on himself, because he was an electrician. He knew how to do all that, and I remember a couple of times we had a bill collector came to the house, and we were living on 20 was it 27th Street North?
We live on 28th Street.
Yeah, 28th Street North. I remember somebody, a white guy, came by the house. He was a bill collector, and Dad said, I'm not home. I'm not home. So I went to the door and opened the door up and talked to the man, and then I said, well, my dad, he's not home, and so then after that, I went around right next to the front door was the next room over, you walk down the hallway right to that rate. You remember that small room right next to the, so I went in there, and and Daddy was looking out the window as I was talking to the guy, because the window was over the porch, And so when the man, after I told him Daddy wasn't there, I went in there and I flipped the light on, and he could see Daddy was standing at the window. And I remember how he reacted. He said, so I'm just saying that my father was he was really crafty. And remember how we used to, when Shirley had the event, and we went to various newspaper stands to get a newspaper.
Explain to them who
You know
Cheryl.
how that happened? You
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that? You
Yeah.
remember that?
Yeah.
In those days, you know, you could get newspapers. You know, you just put the little money in the little box, and it and Daddy had a way of going up to the box, you know, and he could take he would take his hands down, you know, then shake his then he would put then he'd take and thump the box, you know, so you can hear the jingle, you know. And we did that he did it at about 2 or 3 or 4 different newspaper stands, and this was on a Sunday. And so he got about 4, maybe 3 or 4 newspapers, and then we went to the maternity ward where Shirley had just had, that was our stepmother, and she had just had a daughter. And then my dad went in there and he was passing the newspapers out to the other ladies. And he said, "Oh, thank you very much, Mrs. Scoggins. Thank you for the new," you know, he was a hero giving them newspapers, you know. So I just thought Dad he was quite charming, you know, and handsome, of course. And I remember when he used to, on Saturdays, he would go, and he would do a lot of his collecting money and stuff. And maybe even some evenings during the winter, in the summertime, we would go with him. He would be collecting money on jobs that he did, and he would go in, and Daddy loved to talk. You know, he would go in and start talking. We keep wondering, when is Daddy coming back? When is he coming back out? You know, when we want to leave? You know, we want to go. And then we'll see him. He would come out on the porch like he's leaving, and then next thing we know, I guess he wouldn't finish the conversation. Then he walked back in the house, started going again for another 10 or 15 minutes, you know. So he could really go. But the amazing thing about it was that we left Tulsa in 1959. So that meant that he was 59. That's when we went to St.
You're right.
So he must have been, let's see, 59. He was still in his 30s then, I guess. You know, what was he about? He was born in 1919, so he would probably just turn 40, huh? He was born in 1918, yeah. So, and I'm just saying all this to say, Paul, that when I look back on what we experienced back then, and when I think of his age and everything at the time, you know, now that we're older, when I think of his age at the time, you know, I'm kind of amazed at the fact of what he had been able to accomplish, you know, because he had his own business. He moved from Archer and Greenwood to the building on Peoria. Remember, they built a little building on Peoria.
Yeah.
And
let me just say, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In Tulsa at that particular time, you know, Jim Crow was probably at its strongest.
Yeah.
And there were 2 that I can recall, Scoggins Electric, and then there was a Tate Electric. And our father, he did not have any union employees. Tate Electric had union employees. And so a lot of the business went to Tate Electric. But I remember one big project my father had at First Baptist Church. There's a Black First Baptist Church in Tulsa. And he was getting a lot of pressure from the unions, a lot of pressure from some of the white electrical contractors. And when I say pressure, because since he didn't have union workers, he could underbid these other guys in terms of what to charge the church. But I think what happened, he got so much pressure, and you know, he wasn't able to finish the job, and you know, they came in and finished the job. So he was always trying to rob Peter to pay Paul. With his workers, you know.
Well, another thing about it too is, like, at that time, you know, he couldn't be a member of the union, you know, because he couldn't be a member of the union, and a lot of the more substantial jobs went to union electricians, and because he couldn't be a member of the union, that closed him out of certain opportunities to get financing, you know, like SBA.
I think Tate Electric was in the union, though.
But I mean, Dad couldn't be a member of the union. He couldn't be a member of the union. They didn't let. He could. And see, one thing that used to tear Daddy up in terms of being very frustrated is the fact that some of the white, I remember we had a couple of white, young white electricians used to work with Daddy, and he was basically training them, you know.
Wow.
He was training them and then when they got trained and everything, they left him, and then they went to the white companies,
Right.
because they,
that's interesting, Don, that both you gentlemen have said that, because that leads into my next question I was going to ask you. And that was, what was the daily life like within the North Tulsa's Black community during the closing days of Jim Crow and the years prior to the start of the civil rights era? What was that like? And you all have already pretty much went into that to talk about that as your father, as a business owner, who was actually a people person, and who has the ability to be able to connect within the community and to articulate the various needs of people, as well as to build business ideas and get support. And I can see that ability to be able to talk. And that's, now I see, Don, why you and I really hit it off when we get to talking. One out talks the other, and then the next thing you know, we're trying to cut each other off because we're talking. But that is a gift. That is a gift, to be able to articulate and communicate and connect with people in the community. And it sounds like your father was one to be able to do that. But even with being able to do that, and we know what happened, what was it like? What was it like? And you've seen your father go through and transition, and you all, as young men at that time, were boys. What was it like in the closing days of Jim Crow?
Let me go in a little bit, Hugh, before I forget, and you can go in on it. It was in 1959. Well, I would say between 58 and 59, because we left Tulsa in 59. I was about 13 going on 14, and you were 14. You had already turned 15, I think, because we left there in the summer, because we went to St. Emma that September, 1959. But I can remember this, is that the Black community was much more cohesive at that time, because not only did my dad have his electrical company, but we had to remember Peavy's grocery store. And then you had Mann Brothers. Mann Brothers lived at the corner of Norfolk and Pine. Remember, right up the street from where Granddaddy's house was on Norfolk Street?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? Okay. So I'm just saying that the positive thing about it was that because of segregation and because of Jim Crow, the Black middle class community and the Black, I would say, working class community, if you want to call it that, they were much more cohesive, and they lived pretty much near each other. They were almost commingled in the same communities. You could probably tell who had more than others, because maybe they had a better car, or maybe the house was kept a little better, but you can always tell who the various people were. And I remember, I never will forget the Mann Brothers around Christmas time. If you remember, Hugh, their house at the corner of Pine and Norfolk, they had the blue lights at Christmas. Their house was always decorated with the blue lights. And Daddy, during that time, he would hang lights for several people who could afford to have him to do that. And Dr. Coots, do you remember Dr. Coots?
Yeah, I remember.
Dr. Coots, he was our family doctor at one point, and at that time he was considered one of the more well-off Blacks in the.
We were colored back in those days.
Huh?
Yeah, we were called colored back in those days.
Yeah, colored back in those days.
Get him together, big brother. Get him together.
I don't know. Well, I think we advanced from colored to Negro. I think we were Negro then. I think.
Yeah, but we were still Negro and colored, and because some of our family has a little bit of Indian in it, that was sort of peppered in there too. I'm just making a commentation.
Yeah. So. Yeah, but anyway, I was just talking about the cohesiveness of the neighborhood. I thought that was very that was something that I determined. And Dad, he had a gift of gab. And one thing I used to remember, and you remember when he and Uncle Carl would start talking, and Dad was, he was quite visionary when it came to politics too, and I think if he had lived, I'm pretty sure he would probably wind up being a Republican, because he was very, maybe not today, but I think his what influenced him a lot was the fact that he didn't want to be beholden to anybody. That was the thing. And he really didn't like working for the man, if you know what I meant, so.
But Paul, let me
you go ahead. Why don't you go ahead?
Let me say this as a segue, not to take off from what you said, to take back what you said, Donald, but I remember Dad had taken you and I we were supposed to be going to this Jack and Jill. We went to this Jack and Jill party. And Daddy, I guess this was his way of getting us into the mainstream of the social life in the colored part of Tulsa, if you will. And Donald and I went there, and I don't know about Donald, but I felt so ill at ease because even within the Black community, there was still what I would call a caste system. You had there was a social difference between people. And clearly, in my opinion, when I was at that party, I was saying to myself, this is no place that I need to be. Okay. And so when Daddy picked me and Donald up from the party, he said, how did everything go? You know, he said, you want to go back? We said, no.
We didn't say, I stayed with the Jack and Jill, you know.
Oh, you stay, okay. Well, Donald and I can stay with, well, see, he's more social than I am. But I do recall, as much as there might have been some kind of blending or cohesiveness within the Black community or the colored community, there was still a caste system, you know, those who had it, those who didn't, you know, those who went to college, Langston University, Tuskegee, whatever you want to call it, and those who didn't. And it was very apparent that you could see that even in Tulsa at that time. You know, one of the things that Daddy was very big on education. If you remember, Donald, we couldn't look at Ed Sullivan or Milton Berle until we did our homework on Sunday. And we had kids that were calling their house call, asking us about homework. And my father said, you did your homework, you let them do their homework. Mm-hmm. And
you know, so your dad had guidelines for you all to follow.
Oh yeah.
In the house. Well, that reminds me of when we were kids, and my mom and dad, they would put us in the bed at 6 o'clock. It was 5 of us. They would put us in the bed at 6 o'clock. It was light outside. The kids were playing outside, and I guess they wanted their private time. But you know, when I got older, I didn't understand that. But that taught me discipline and order in the household. And a lot of people that I grew up with were doing different things. And one place where I went to visit a prison, and the chaplain was showing me around. I was going in counseling, a lot of the guys in there, and a lot of them knew me that were in there. And but I told the chaplain, I said, you know, I know these guys. I grew up with these guys, but I had to be in before dark, before them. So there was some discipline in my household, you know, and so those things protect you.
Yeah, Daddy was pretty much like that too. On Friday, when we come home from school, my father got home about 6 or 7 or whatever, but we did not have any extracurricular activities until he looked at what homework you had. You know, you had to do a certain amount of homework before you could play. And by Sunday, when you went to bed Sunday, you had all your homework done.
That's right. That's right.
And Donald, do you recall one of the comments Daddy made? And you know, I'll try to be a little delicate when I say this, but he said him and my uncle used to talk politics all the time, and they used to talk. We used to hear this word NIG. I said, "What the heck is NIG?" And so one time, me and my brother Donald and I were over at Daddy's shop, and we said, "Uncle Carl, what does NIG stand for?" He said, "You never heard of NIG?" And he told us what NIG was. And later on, Daddy said, and Donald, I don't know if you remember this, he said, NIGs come in all colors, come in all races. He said, anybody can be an NIG. It's your thought process, how you conduct yourself, and what you're doing with your life. He said, if you waiting at home for the white man to knock on the door and say, well, you know what, there's been 200 or 300 years and you all been treated a certain way, I'm going to give you a job. He said, if you sit around and wait for that, hell will freeze over before that happens.
Right.
And I say all that to say that Daddy sort of instilled in my brother and I that we had to go out and make it on our own and not rest on the laurels because we were colored.
Yeah, but one thing I'll say this.
Go ahead, Donald, and I got a question to lead into that too. Go ahead, Donald.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to get back to the Jack and Jill part. Maybe it didn't register. Maybe it didn't register with Hugh like it did with me. But being a member of the Jack and Jill, I think there was a here's what I would sense. with the Jack and Jill, to me, looking back on it, it was I would say the young the students of families that were, well, you're correct. It was sort of a caste type system. And I think in a certain sense, we were sort of like in that
middle ground.
I would like to say privileged sort of to a certain extent. And I think mainly because Daddy was a businessman. And I know there were a couple of people who came from families that were considered lesser, so to speak. But the kids were achievers in their schoolwork. You know, because I remember a couple of kids who we never went to their house because, you know, they had meetings. They went around every time they had a meeting, they went to a different person's home and everything. And a couple of people I remember, this one particular guy who was in class with me, he was smart as a whip, but we never went to his house, you know. And I found out the reason why, because he lived on the other side of Lewis. Remember, you know where Lewis was, Hugh? Lewis Avenue?
Apache Avenue, you remember Apache?
Not Apache, but Lewis. You know, Lewis was the other street. It was sort of like on the other side of Lewis is where the shanty town, so to speak, if you know what I mean. You know, the shanty, you know what I mean by shanty.
We'll get into that part later.
Okay, no, but I'm just meant that this person was a member of the Jack and Jill because he was quite smart, you know, and everything like that. And some of the others weren't that smart, but they came from a different kind of breeding, if you know what I mean, you know. So, you know, doctors and lawyers and things like that for the, you know, I think you can get the gist of it, Paul, you know.
Sure, I got it. We understand.
You said you had a question, Paul?
One thing, I'll say this, because of all that, I wanted to be a part of the so-called quote unquote elite. I didn't want to be considered regular, to tell you the truth, because I didn't see where being regular was really beneficial, you know, to a certain extent, you know, so.
Well, you know, it just shows, it just shows, number one, that your father set standards for you to follow, and he led by example. And that leads into the next question, and we're going to close, because ladies and gentlemen, these two men, you all, I have to have you come back. You know, I'm going to have you come back again, but I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you a question before we close. Is that, can you tell me about the Black community's economic climate before essentially becoming comprised by the government programs? Can you tell me how that was? Briefly, just in a nutshell, before we close. I want to start out with Hugh, and then, of course, Don, I'm going to come back with you.
Well, you know, as far as I could sense from that standpoint, I wasn't aware of, and I did not see a lot of, I didn't see any kind of development or financial development that came from the government. People pretty much sort of were self-financed, and they pretty much depended on their own communities for survival. If you recall, during the Jim Crow days, there were no programs per se. Any programs that were, they were like safe programs. In other words, they were programs that might have been, from a educational standpoint. But in terms of business development and things like that, there were no problem for people of color. You know, they had to, you know, they were self-financing. They had to do their own. Now, there might have been, during that Jim Crow era, and even after that, there might have been some, what I would call some tokenism kind of financing, but nothing that's really, that I could say that I could remember as being hardcore financing to support, you know, the Black community, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I would pretty much agree with you, because and I wouldn't call this a government program, but we did have several banks in the Black community. So if you were able to get loans from the bank, then that was the program, so to speak. But they didn't have anything where you could, they didn't have it like they have today, where government has pretty much sprinkles money throughout the Black community in certain cases. And I think
there was no subsidized financing or anything like that.
Yeah, it was everything. You had to do it yourself. You know, you had to be credit worthy, I guess, to be able to get a loan from a bank, you know. And then one thing I will say is that, and I know you want to close, but once Jim Crow, so to speak, ended, and these programs started, to me, that was the downfall of the Black community, quite frankly, you know.
Wow. You know, I want to close with this as we begin to close this session out, because you two gentlemen are definitely coming back, because Hugh, I always share with Don that his voice, as well as yours, is still needed. We still need to hear it. There's so much information and energy and passion behind what you do, what you've been able to do. And Hugh, still looking for another job.
Still looking for another job.
Because you feel what you feel is the need that's out here is pulling on your experience that's within you.
Right. And I still think there's a lot that I can offer, particularly
yes.
particularly in the area of business development,
yes,
business mindset. Not saying that it doesn't already exist, but as a 79-year-old person, I think I can still contribute somewhat to the you know. And I just want to say to you, Donald has talked an awful lot about you, and you know, he's been very encouraged by you. And I like to come on anytime if there's anything I can do to help. If I can get down there to Fairfax where all the boozies are, I'll come and do that too.
one thing I want to say, Paul, about Hugh, in that, and maybe I'm kind of falling at the same category, is that he's not quite 79 yet, though. You know, you're not. don't rush. No, but I was gonna say that maybe this is because I think this is because of our grandparents, granddaddy, and even mother. They lived to be relatively had advanced ages and everything. So we may have I think we have a skewed, like Vic tells me, I have a skewed sense of age. You know, in other words, when you get to a certain age, I guess they figure you should be coasting, you know, but I don't necessarily want to coast. And I think Hugh he's very analytical, and I think he would be good at maybe working in maybe a small business advisory type role someplace, you know, and that's what we're gonna do in Baltimore, help the small business people, you know.
And see, that's what's needed. And when we come back for part 2, phase 2, I want to talk about what you two gentlemen have been able to do in the community, and what you've been able to contribute, and what you're able to contribute to help people build not only their businesses, but to be able to have a direction from a political angle, to give them direction on who to vote for, how to vote, and how your vote is going to be used to help you or individuals get to where they need to go, and leading the community, leading that state, and leading them to where they need to be. I want you all that are listening today, I want you to tap into this. I need you to share this on your different platforms, because there's a saying that I have: when you find out what works, it will activate everything else that will work. And this is proof. Donald, Hugh, you are two living proof individuals that have found out what works, and it's activated everything else that will work. And that's your career. That's having your dad be an example, having your granddad be an example, your grandmother be an example, where they came from. You have good roots, as my father would say. You come from good stock. You know, a tip doesn't fall far from the tree. You know, all those things he used to say. I understand that now. And even as understanding that, and that me having 4 boys of my own, and I just want you gentlemen to know that I'm gonna be a granddaddy too here soon, this coming November. So excited about that. But still, there's another child coming into the Taylor family. And I want to make sure that this legacy, these interviews, what we're doing now, that our children's children will be able to look back and blow kisses at them, because we've set the platform, we've set the groundwork, we give them direction, a point of reference. And so I want you all to know, Donald, thank you once again. Hugh, thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, share, again, like I said, share this page, the Language of Life podcast, because we're having these 2 fireball men come back, and they're going to share some detailed information that will help you with your decisions on where you need to go, and resources. Because I want to talk about that. Donald, I want to talk about what you've been able to do. Hugh, I want to be able to talk about the kind of work that you gentlemen have been able to do, that have set the platform for a lot of standards, a lot of foundational groundwork that we're able to stand on today. And I want to talk also about how, Donald, how you and I met, and the area where we met, and how that's going to make an effect. Hugh, I'm excited about meeting you. It's been a pleasure meeting you. This is not the last time that you all going to hear from your little brother, Bruh Paul Taylor.
Okay.
So,
Fair
ladies,
enough.
thank you, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it. They've said they will come back, and we're going to be coming back to you real soon with more detailed information and direction. You all have a great time. Don, thank you. Hugh, thank you. And
All
you
right.
all have a great weekend, a great day. Bye now.
Take care now.
Thank you.